Today we're going to show and explain the process of what we call a brake, clean, and lube. We're going to take your brakes apart where you may not need new parts, but they may have a shake, or they may be rusty, or there may be rust on the rotor. But everything is still within spec where we can resurface the rotor, clean and lube everything so everything's working properly, save you money because you don't need parts, give it the most perfect finish as possible, and some tricks we do to show how it lasts as long as possible, and what our experience has taught us to do things the way we do them to make the brake job last as long as possible. That is our goal. We're going to go through the steps, show you guys some stuff that we do, hopefully show other technicians some steps. Maybe they'll learn something, or maybe they'll put their input in, and that's what we're going to do today. So let's go. He's accessing the database. This will tell us how much we can cut on the rotor. It tells us the thickness of the rotor and tells us the minimum thickness, how far we can go before we have to recommend replacing the rotor. So I'll say cutting rotors was kind of extinct for a while. You know, we were importing rotors and it was so cheap to replace them that a lot of shops got rid of their brake lathes. They stopped doing it. Parts stores used to cut them all the time because rotors can have more life to them. Just because the surface gets delaminated or a little rust on it, there's no reason to throw them out when, especially with the new cost of rotors these days. So if you can end up with having a brand new brake feel with no new parts, it's a lot more affordable and you'll get a lot more life out of your brakes. So right now he's cleaning up any of the metal debris that are stuck to the rotor from this resurfacing. As you can see, the metal flakes that come off it, you don't want those getting in your pads. If you get too much of it in your brake pads, it'll cause a metal on metal feeling and sound until it wears out, or it could embed in the pads and cause damage. So this is an aluminum dust that helps prevent corrosion, and it helps the break-in period of the rotor be longer before it has a chance to rust. And it also makes it look really nice, and it helps prevent rust. No hub is perfect, and no rotor is perfect. And if you cut the rotor on the machine, you can make the rotor perfect, but then you put it on a hub that's not perfect. And the brake shake that people feel usually comes from the rotor actually moving back and forth in the pads, causing your steering wheel to shake or the vehicle to shake. So when you cut it on the vehicle, you compensate for all of that. So this rotor is cut perfectly true to this hub. So that rotor fits that hub, and it has the lowest amount of tolerance or movement, causing your brakes to feel like glass. It's the most beautiful brake pedal you can have is when we're done doing this treatment. At Next Gen, even when we're doing a brake clean and lube, we remove the rotor. We remove the rotor so we can clean behind here, and so we can treat this. We spray wax on the backing plates, and in this case, we'll possibly lubricate the parking brakes. If we don't remove that, we're not doing what we can to prevent this backing plate from rotting off. And when they rot off, then you have shorter lived brakes. They don't cool properly because it's made to direct air where it's supposed to go. And it just gets all nasty, and we don't like to see that. So when we do a brake clean and lube, we don't just pull the caliper and just clean and lube the pins. We pull everything off and do it as if we're doing a brand new brake job. This brake pad's not perfectly flat because the old rotor had a divot in it, and I can actually feel it there, and you can actually see the high spot. So what we do is we just take this and we'll take the pad flat just so it can break into the new rotor perfectly. So we're just doing it until it's perfectly flat. So now that's going to hit flat on the rotor. Where the shoes touch the backing plate is where you want grease. So I'll move this over a little bit, and then this is a high temp grease, similar to a caliper grease. So we're going to get that on each touch point of the pads. And this is the adjuster. You want to keep the adjuster free, so we're going to get a little grease on here. This is a high temperature wax that's a protective layer. This is what we like to spray on the backing plates. So to try to carefully spray it on the backing plates without getting the parking brake shoes. And the goal here is to prevent these from rusting before they should. And if we can do this brake clean and lube once a year, these will last forever. and they are quite expensive to replace because you have to remove the wheel bearing. You have to remove all the parking brakes to do so. So this helps keep these in great shape. Any of our customers who we have been maintaining since the beginning have never needed backing plates, which is an awesome feat. This is never seized. This will not hurt the brake shoes. We're not scared to get it on anything. It's just aluminum flake dust. This is actually copper flake dust. And then your rotor, right?
Yep.
Go ahead. What I'm doing now is adjusting the parking brake. The procedure is to put them as tight as you can until it doesn't move, and then back it off. And that way your parking brake is working properly. And a lot of times it's common to get a brake job done and your parking brake not work properly, because a lot of times that doesn't happen. That's a very important part to your parking brakes working, is to have a perfect adjustment. So this is your caliper bracket. Your brake pads go in the caliper bracket. Now what happens, and what we see a lot of, not in this case, it's not a great example, but, well, I guess it is. See where the brake pads are in the bracket? This is a stainless shim, this is a steel bracket. The steel bracket rusts jacking into the brake pad, causing it not to slide very well in here. And when a lot of times the brakes are frozen, and it's not because the caliper is frozen, because the pads are frozen in the bracket. So what we do with every clean and lube, we take the brackets off, carefully remove your stainless shims. We're taking these off. We want to make sure these are clean, which isn't much more than just make sure there's not buildup on it. They don't have to be shiny clean. They have to not have any buildup on them. Then we're going to clean this. And on this caliper, like I said, this area is not the problem, which usually is. On this caliper bracket, this is the problem. This rust here is rusting and taking out the play. So you want your brake pads tight, but not too tight. And when this rust, we call it rust jacking, lifts this up into the brake pad, putting pressure here so they can't release properly. So basically it's like driving around, when they're stuck in there, it's like driving around with your brakes on all the time. We're also going to pull these are your rubber, these keep water out of your slide pins. This is a slide pin. So this grease over time gets really nasty. This one is actually in great shape, but we always see the rust come in. You can see it starting right there. So when the water gets in there, this rust will jack the rubber and get deeper and deeper until finally water is getting in this pin. So what we want to make sure we do is, if this were bad, we clean this groove and we make sure grease is in the groove, preventing water from getting into the pin. And we also see the problems happen on this part. So same thing will happen. Rust will get behind here and work its way, pushing in on the boot and then allowing access. Once these pins are frozen, your caliper can't release as well. So you may still, for no reason, you'll need new brakes early, a new caliper early. So what we do is we'll put a little grease on there. So we want to make sure there's grease in there. I put this back in, and then we just do a spin. Now we know that whole groove is grease in it, so water can't get in there. And the grease actually helps protect the metal and keep the water out. Same thing on the pin. We're going to grease the pin. We don't want too much in there because we don't want a hydraulic pressure. So we have to be careful not to get too much on the back end. And we'll put this in, and then we'll twist it. And then twisting it, now that's sealed with some new grease in the pin. So this can float. You want that to float. That shouldn't be hard. This prevents these from freezing, which prevents you from having to buy a new caliper when you go to do your next brake job. That's why it's so important in our area to do this service, because the car washes wash all the grease off. Pressure washer at your wheel washes all the grease off. The salt, the sand, everything gets on them, causing them to not work properly. So that's where we recommend doing the service once a year. At least a clean and lube. The cut, you don't always need the cut, but you do at least need a clean and lube yearly. Or if you didn't drive the car and we inspect them, they still look greasy, we're not going to recommend it. We're going to say everything looks good, we'll check them next time. These brackets, you can clean them, there's a lot of different ways to clean these. We use a sandblast cabinet, which is the most effective way because we do this a lot. We do this multiple times a day. We're gonna go to the cabinet and show you. There you go. We'll go. This is before we sandblast it, this is after. So this side's clean, it's like a brand new surface. Looks exactly like if we got a brand new remanufactured caliper bracket. It would look like this. We're doing a brake service, so we're just cleaning the important parts. We're not doing the whole bracket. We're just cleaning the important parts, the functional parts is what we're worried about here. And you can see it looks like brand new. We're gonna put this back together, just show a couple more things here. These are the shims. We're gonna clean, make sure those are clean with the wire brush. And then we're gonna put grease on, this is the high temp caliper grease, the same stuff we use on the slides, on the metal. Now the purpose of this is to prevent the rust shacking. So we want to prevent the rust shacking as much as possible. So by greasing that metal, we'll prevent that from getting rusty again in the near future and causing the same problem you have of the brake pads hanging up. So it should squeeze out of there. And that's what we want to see. We want to see grease behind those, and that protects the metal. Acts as a rust proofing, as you will. And then again, now we're going to put the grease over it. This allows the pads to slide in the brackets as easily as possible, and also prevents this will also prevent the edge, the side of your pads, because the pads can rust as well, causing a rust jacking effect. So we want to keep that greased as well. Another point of inspection, this is your caliper. This is your piston. This should go in pretty easily. A good caliper, I really should be able to push it in by hand. We have a tool for it, but as you can see, I just pushed it in by hand. That's an excellent caliper. It slides and operates greatly. This area here is always forgotten about. In this case, the aluminum caliper is not very bad, but if there's any rust on here, it'll prevent this from squeezing the brake pads flat. It'll make it go crooked, and the flex of it going crooked will also give you a soft pedal. So it's always very important to inspect your forks. I call these your caliper forks. We want to inspect those, make sure those are clean as well. These are caliper bolts. We always put Loctite on them. They come from the factory with Loctite on them. I know you can say all you want about the Loctite, or that I've never used, a lot of mechanics say they've never used it, never had a problem, but we're not looking for this. We're looking to hold responsibility for your caliper bolts staying tight, not for 2 years, forever. And when a brake gets hot, 500 degrees, 800 degrees, and back to 20 degrees if it's wintertime, they can come loose. And it might come loose 3 years after you did it. The Loctite ensures that never happens.
And keeps the threads from being
the other important factor is Loctite will act as your never seize. It'll seal the threads off so the salt can't get in there rusting your threads anymore. And it'd be nice if you can grease them is good, but the problem with grease is it can allow them to come loose when they're not supposed to. When possible, we take these off. In this case, we can take these off. So we'll take these off and inspect behind them for rust. You'll see some stuff there. I can quickly, that causes a spongy pedal. So we're just going to take off some of that. Make sure this is clean. So what we see a lot of is these get rusty behind. These are steel shims, and they turn to rust. And you can see it's starting here. This is a newer vehicle, not much of an issue yet. But when these get rusty, it causes a major spongy pedal. It's almost like a spring. So it swells, and then you have to compress it to apply your brakes. So to prevent that, what we do is we'll put some grease behind the shim. And then we'll reapply it. And then we're going to put it over it, but I like to do it after I put the pad in here so I don't get grease everywhere. like I said, and then we cover the backs. So from head to toe, we'll get grease on this. And this is, other parts of the country, you don't need to do this. Here, we do this excessively. It helps them last the longest and prevents the rust the longest. Like I said, car washes and everything blasting the grease off it, and then you get salt and sand and everything else that that you don't want on your brakes getting on them. The grease protects them and makes them last. When this happens, because the grease is in there, you want it to release. You don't have to hold pressure. So what I'm doing now is just burping the air out of it till it stays in on its own. Yeah, these are only about $600 or something. And you didn't loosen the top bolt?
No, I did not.
I'll just check it to be sure. These rubber plugs are always missing. We're really good about putting them back on. Somebody else has been in here before, so we have these on order. We're actually out of stock of them. So that's supposed to be plugged off, but never sees over, and then I think that's it.